Picture walking through the gates of China's Forbidden City in the 16th century. Beyond its crimson walls lies not just an empire's seat of power, but a shadow world built on calculated human transformation. Every whispered secret, every imperial decree, every thread of power flows through the hands of men who paid the ultimate price for their position, their very masculinity. The story of Chinese eunuchs isn't merely about castration. It's about how an empire engineered the perfect power system through systematic human modification. For nearly 2 millennia, from 146 AD until 1924, China perfected a mechanism that transformed young boys into living tools of imperial control through a single, irreversible act of mutilation. Think about the psychological mastery at play. These weren't just servants created through simple training. The empire designed a system where complete genital removal, performed without anesthesia and with a 50% mortality rate, served as both initiation ritual and lifetime bond. Those who survived emerged as something entirely new, neither male nor female, but a third category engineered specifically for power. The genius of this system lay in its perfect circular logic. Poor families would offer their sons, receiving 250 taels of silver, a fortune that could lift an entire generation from poverty. The boys who survived the procedure could never return to normal society, ensuring their absolute loyalty to the system that created them. As they rose through the ranks, these same eunuchs would then perpetuate the cycle, overseeing the creation of the next generation of their kind. What makes this system truly fascinating is how it evolved from simple palace servants into something far more sinister. By the Ming Dynasty, these transformed individuals had created their own shadow government, complete with a 12,000-employee bureaucracy and secret service division. They alone could move freely between the emperor's private quarters and the outside world, controlling the flow of information and access to power itself. Consider the psychological architecture. Each eunuch kept their severed organs in a precious container called bao, a permanent reminder of their sacrifice and transformation. This wasn't just about physical modification, it was about creating a new class of human beings whose very identity was built on their separation from normal society. This transformation from mutilated outcast to power broker didn't happen by chance. The empire crafted an intricate system where eunuchs became the only bridge between the emperor's private world and the machinery of state. Think of them as living keyholes. Every piece of information, every official document, every whispered secret had to pass through their hands to reach the Dragon Throne. By the Ming Dynasty, these former outcasts had engineered something unprecedented, a shadow state within the state. Their bureaucracy grew to rival the official government, with 12,000 employees and their own secret service division. They controlled the imperial household's vast wealth, managed enormous construction projects like the Forbidden City, and even led military campaigns. But what made this system truly ingenious was its self-perpetuating nature. Eunuchs who rose to power would identify promising candidates from poor families, creating a continuous cycle of recruitment and advancement. They understood something fundamental about power. Those who control access control everything. While scholar officials might have held official positions, eunuchs determined whose memorials reached the emperor's eyes, whose petitions received attention, and whose careers advanced or crumbled. The empire had essentially created a perfect power loop. Mutilated children grew into powerful adults, who then perpetuated the system that created them. These men couldn't have families of their own, so they invested everything into maintaining and expanding their influence. Their loyalty wasn't to individuals or even to the emperor himself, but to the system that gave them power. Consider how this played out in practice. A eunuch like Wang Zhen could rise from being a mutilated servant to commanding armies and shaping imperial policy. The system turned physical weakness into institutional strength. Unable to build traditional family dynasties, they created power networks that transcended bloodlines, operating on pure loyalty and shared experience. What makes this system even more fascinating is how it survived repeated attempts to dismantle it. Every new dynasty would promise to limit eunuch power, yet within generations, they'd become indispensable again. The system's genius lay in its inevitability. As long as there was an emperor who needed to be separated from the outside world, there would be a need for these transformed intermediaries. The psychological mastery of the eunuch system went far beyond mere physical control. These transformed individuals developed an intricate web of influence that played on fundamental human desires: power, status, and survival. Think about it. In a society where family lineage meant everything, these men created an alternate path to power that completely bypassed traditional social structures. The empire's genius lay in understanding that trauma, when properly channeled, creates unbreakable bonds. Each eunuch carried not just physical scars, but a psychological imprint that shaped their entire worldview. They weren't just servants. They were members of an exclusive brotherhood, forged through shared sacrifice. This shared experience created loyalty deeper than any family tie could provide. What's particularly fascinating is how this system turned traditional Chinese values on their head. In a culture where producing male heirs was paramount, these men who could never have children became some of the most powerful figures in society. The very thing that made them outcasts, their inability to create traditional family dynasties, became their greatest strength, forcing them to build power networks based on merit and loyalty rather than bloodlines. The social engineering aspect was equally brilliant in its complexity. Poor families saw the eunuch system as a pathway out of poverty, while noble families were required to provide eunuchs as a form of tribute. This created a unique social mixture within the eunuch ranks. Street smarts merged with aristocratic education, producing a class of civil servants unlike any other in history. But perhaps the most ingenious aspect was how the system created its own self-sustaining psychological ecosystem. Eunuchs became masters at identifying and grooming potential successors, creating a continuous chain of mentorship and power transfer that operated parallel to, yet separate from, the official government structure. They understood something profound about human nature: that people will accept almost any transformation if it leads to power. The psychological impact extended far beyond the palace walls. The very existence of eunuchs served as a powerful reminder of imperial authority, living symbols of the emperor's ability to fundamentally transform human beings. Their presence created a constant awareness that power in imperial China operated on levels far more complex than mere hereditary succession or scholarly achievement. The last imperial eunuch's death in 1996 didn't just mark the end of a person, it closed a chapter on one of history's most sophisticated systems of institutional control. But here's the thing that should make you pause. While we no longer physically mutilate people for power, the psychological principles that made the eunuch system so effective still echo through modern corridors of power. Think about how modern institutions create their own versions of thoroughly pure servants. Corporate cultures often demand a kind of psychological castration, the surrender of personal identity for organizational power. Just as eunuchs could never return to normal society, many of today's power structures create dependencies that make it nearly impossible for individuals to exist outside the system they serve. The eunuch system's most enduring legacy isn't in its physical brutality, but in demonstrating how effectively institutions can transform human beings through controlled trauma and promised power. The empire discovered something fundamental about human nature. Give people enough power, and they'll not only accept their own transformation, but eagerly participate in transforming others. What's particularly chilling is how the core mechanics persist. Just as eunuchs controlled information flow between the emperor and the outside world, Modern gatekeepers, whether corporate executives, political advisors, or media controllers, derive their power from managing access and controlling narratives. The physical walls of the Forbidden City have been replaced by digital barriers, but the principle remains the same. Power flows through controlled channels. The system's genius lay in creating a self-perpetuating cycle of trauma and power that survived multiple dynasties and numerous attempts at reform. Even today, we see similar patterns in how institutions create loyal servants through a combination of sacrifice, reward, and psychological conditioning. The tools may have changed, but the underlying architecture remains eerily familiar. Perhaps the most important lesson from the eunuch system is how power structures can turn personal disadvantage into institutional advantage. Just as eunuchs transformed their inability to have families into a source of political strength, modern institutions often exploit their members' vulnerabilities to create stronger loyalty bonds.